And so you have an active role to play. And I've always enjoyed the dynamism. They bring drama to the conference center. Sometimes they bring demonstrations. Occasionally they try to disrupt things. But it's all to draw awareness, to draw attention to how much they feel. Sometimes against the youth doing their own thing. The worst that I have seen, and I've seen a lot, when young ladies can straight and jump on the table just to make a point about climate change. That's how some people can go. One occasion also in Montreal, somebody threw a piece of pie into the face of the chief negotiator of the United States because they didn't like what he was saying. So a lot of drama takes place at the conference of the parties. But I see it's all part of the game. So we're going to see what is likely to happen in Durban in 2 weeks. I've said already that the conference of the parties is a bit like a circus. And you will think that it's one big meeting, but it is not. It's actually 6 separate official meetings taking place at the conference at the same time. In addition, there are contact groups, there are consultations. I mean, there are myriad of meetings. But the 6 main meetings are the Conference of the Parties, which comprises of parties to the Climate Change Convention, and then the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties, which is also a meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. You need to understand that there is a difference between the Conference of the Parties to the Convention and the Conference of the Parties serving as the meeting of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol. So those are 2 major meetings, and they are their plenary sessions during the 2 weeks convened as and when required. Then in addition, we've got the 2 ad hoc working groups. And the focus of the conference is going to be on what the 2 ad hoc working groups are doing and the products that are expecting from those meetings. So first you've got the ad hoc working group on the Kyoto Protocol. The acronym that you see, which you will hear, is AWGKP. It's essentially the ad hoc working group on the Kyoto Protocol. And then the second process is AWGLCA, the ad hoc working group on long-range cooperative action under the convention. So there's an ongoing process under the Kyoto Protocol and an ongoing process under the convention. Now, under the Kyoto Protocol, the parties at their first conference of the parties in Montreal, Canada, in the year 2005, decided to initiate a process pursuant to Article 3.9 of the Convention, which requires that 7 years before the end of the first commitment period, the parties should initiate a process to consider amendments to Article B of the Kyoto Protocol. So this contact group was established on the basis of a provision of the protocol, which requires that before the end of the first, and we need a new commitment period to begin from 1st of January 2013. Now, if we are to get an amendment to Annex B the Kyoto Protocol, then we must secure it in Durban, and it must be ratified and accepted by all parties by the latest. Whilst we need to secure an amendment to Annex B of the protocol, which contains the emission reduction targets of the developed countries, we see an unwillingness on the part of the Annex 1 parties. And when we talk about Annex 1 parties, we are talking about the developed countries. And these developed countries have a commitment under the protocol to reduce their emission of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Now, for the first commitment period, they accepted to reduce their emissions by 5% in aggregate across the board. If you put all their emission reduction targets together, and if they fulfill them, you get 5% reduction at 1990 levels by the year 2020. But then there is an unwillingness on the part of the developed countries at the moment. They have come up with some new ideas. They call it pledge and review. Instead of accepting to reduce specifically at certain levels as agreed among the parties and contained in the protocol, they decided that we don't want that specific commitment anymore. We don't want to bind ourselves to reduce our emissions at a specified level to be agreed by all. What we want to do is we want to pledge. We make the pledge and we will aim at reducing it. And those pledges were made in Copenhagen. But what we are saying, and what developing countries are saying, and what your groups are saying, is that this is not enough. A pledge and a review will not achieve what the international community wants. We want binding commitments. We want to hold them to reducing specifically at levels that we can measure, not what you want to do. And then also we find that there is a deliberate attempt by the developed countries to kill the Kyoto Protocol. As a matter of fact, some of them have come out clearly that they do not want to see the Kyoto Protocol go into a second commitment period. So Japan, Russia, and Canada have come out to say that they will not be part to a second commitment period. And this has introduced some new dimension into the negotiating process, because we all felt that we are going to get an amendment to the protocol. Now some key players are saying that they do not want to be part of it. Already the United States is not a party to the Kyoto Protocol. So if you take these major countries out, what do we do? Do we accept that Kyoto should die? Or we should keep fighting, keep pressing on with the hope that there will be an amendment to Annex B? Now, the pledges that they have made, or which they made in Cancun and also in Copenhagen, amount in total to 12%. Well, one would say that it's an improvement, but if you take out the offsets and all that they have to get out of it, it comes to less than 5%. But worst of all, is that the figures that they have come out with, the emission reduction targets that they have proposed in their pledges, are much lower than what the IPCC, The IPCC is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It has made certain recommendations that in order to stabilize greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere at a level that will prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate change system, we need to reduce emission of greenhouse gases. First, by 40 to 45% at 1990 levels by the year 2020. This is what the IPCC has proposed, and which, according to the scientists and all the research that they have done, can help stabilize greenhouse gas emissions in the atmosphere. And the developed countries have now come up with figures which are much lower than that, and that is not going to help us. For us in Africa, it's quite devastating, the pledges that the developed countries have made, because they are insufficient to keep temperature rise below 1.5 degrees centigrade as demanded, not only by us, but also as required under the IPCC Fourth Assessment Report. In Cancun and in Copenhagen, the developed countries asserted that they will reduce their emissions in order to limit global temperatures to about 2 degrees. But according to the IPCC report, and according to what we know in Africa, 2 degrees rise in temperature means more than 2 degrees. In fact, for Africa, it is 4, it is 5 degrees. And so we will experience a certain degree of warming, which is more than what the rest of the world will experience if we stick to the 2 degrees. So that's why Africa is saying that according to the science, according to what the IPCC has recommended, we want global temperatures to be kept at not more than 1.5 degrees. Now, if we don't get a decision in Durban on an amendment to the Annex B of the Kyoto Protocol, we face a problem. If we are able to reach an agreement in Durban on amendments to Annex B, which contains the emission reduction commitments of the developed countries, as I've said earlier, we are running out of time. Certain quick steps will need to be taken. We need to secure enough ratifications, and according to the protocol right now, we need 3/4 of the parties to the Kyoto Protocol to ratify any amendment for it to enter into force. Now, currently, there are about 194 parties to the Kyoto Protocol. So take 3/4 of that, maybe we're talking about 140 or thereabout. It's going to be extremely difficult to secure enough ratifications from 140 or so countries to enable the protocol amendment to enter into force by the end of next year. So we really have a problem. Okay, I think we can go. Now, if an agreement is not reached in Durban on an amendment to the Kyoto Protocol, then definitely we are going to have a gap between the first and the second commitment period. And this has serious implications for the future of the Kyoto Protocol. Will that spell the doom of the protocol? What will happen to the commitments of Annex 1 parties as enshrined in Annex B of the protocol? Definitely, those commitments may lapse because they are for a certain specific period. And then what will happen to the mechanisms such as the clean development mechanism, joint implementation, and emissions trading? These are mechanisms that have been established under the Kyoto Protocol to assist developing countries to implement measures, call it the fast start and the long-term finance. So they promised that they were going to give $10 billion a year from the year 2010 to 2012 to assist developing countries to meet their commitments and their obligations under the convention. 10 billion for about 120 or more countries. I leave you to judge. And then they also proposed $100 billion a year starting from 2020 to assist developing countries in their efforts to address climate change. Now, information available to us all is that even this 10 billion that was promised has not materialized. Not only has it not materialized, only a very small percentage has been given. But the developed countries in their accounting process are saying that they've given the 10 billion. And if you ask them where it has gone to, there's very clever accounting. Money they give for aid in the area of agriculture or health or water resources development is classified as aid they give towards climate change. For the simple reason that climate change is a cross-cutting issue. So definitely if they give Ghana aid to address forestry, you can also say that it applies to addressing climate change. And so they are using ODA money to account for climate change. They say that the greater part of the 10 billion has been given, but we don't see it. In Cancun, a decision was taken. One of the key decisions was to establish a green climate fund. And the Green Climate Fund was essentially a fund that is to assist developing countries with their mitigation efforts and adaptation. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And the fund established a transition committee made up of developing and developed countries to consider the modalities for operationalizing the fund. They've had a number of meetings. The last meeting was in